The sky above Earth had not belonged to humanity for 300 years, and on this cold morning in Geneva, the final humiliation was about to begin. Ambassador Cale Vorn stood at the podium of the United Earth Council chamber, his tall gray figure casting a shadow over the human delegates who sat in silence before him. His 4 eyes scanned the room with the calm satisfaction of a predator who had already won. "You have been given 60 rotations," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber like the toll of a funeral bell. 60 rotations to evacuate your species from this world, and after that time has passed, this planet will be cleansed for Dominion expansion. Secretary General Maria Santos rose from her seat, her hands trembling but her voice steady as she spoke. "Ambassador, there are 8 billion people on this planet, and 60 days is not enough time to move even a fraction of them. We beg you to reconsider this decision." Cale Vorn tilted his head, and something like amusement crossed his alien features as he replied, "The Volturi Dominion does not reconsider, human. We have crushed 1,000 civilizations beneath our feet, and your species is simply the next name on a very long list." He turned and walked out of the chamber without another word, leaving behind a room full of people who understood that their death sentence had just been delivered. 3 centuries earlier, humanity had believed it was ready for the stars, and when the first Volturi ships appeared in orbit, there had been celebrations in the streets of every major city on Earth. People had dreamed of friendship with alien races, of sharing knowledge and culture, of joining a galactic community. Those dreams had died in 3 days. The Volturi had not come seeking friendship. They had come seeking territory, resources, and slaves. And humanity's most advanced weapons had bounced harmlessly off their shields like stones thrown at a mountain. The war lasted 72 hours, and by the end, 14 major cities had been reduced to ash earth, surrendered unconditionally. And for 300 years, humanity had served the Dominion. They mined resources, they built ships for their masters, and they kept their heads down while hoping that obedience might earn them survival. That hope had just been proven false 7 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, in a research station that clung to the walls of the Marianas Trench. Dr. Chen was completely unaware that the world above her was ending. She sat in her small laboratory, surrounded by screens displaying sonar readings and geological surveys, her coffee growing cold beside her keyboard as she stared at something that made no sense. "That cannot be right," she muttered to herself. Running the scan for the 5th time, the anomaly had appeared 3 hours ago. A signal emanating from somewhere beneath the ocean floor that matched no known technology. It was not human, but it was also not Volturi, and Dr. Chen had spent her entire career studying both. She pulled up the frequency analysis again and felt her heart skip a beat. The signal was broadcasting on a wavelength that human technology could not even detect until 50 years ago. Yet the pattern suggested the transmission source was ancient beyond measure. Fingers hovered over the communication console as she debated what to do. Official protocol required her to report any unusual findings to the Dominion Authority. But something in her gut told her this was different. Instead of calling the authority, she opened an encrypted channel that she had been given years ago by a man who claimed to work for something called the Earth Defense Remnant. She had thought him crazy at the time, a conspiracy theorist who believed humanity could somehow resist the Dominion now. She was not so sure the channel connected. And a gruff voice answered, "This line is supposed to be for emergencies only." "I know," Dr. Chen replied. "And I think this qualifies. I have found something under the ocean, something that should not exist. And I believe it might be important." There was a long pause before the voice responded. "Tell me everything, Commander Marcus." Webb listened to the scientist's report from his hidden bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, his scarred face showing no emotion as she described the impossible signal. Around him, 24 resistance fighters worked at their stations, monitoring Dominion communications and planning operations that most of the galaxy considered futile when Dr. Chen finished speaking. Webb leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, thinking about a story his grandfather had told him when he was just a boy. "Have you ever heard of the Prometheus Initiative?" he asked. Tier Chun's voice crackled through the speaker. "No, what is that?" "A legend," Webb replied. "Or at least that is what everyone believes. The story says that before the surrender, before the Dominion crushed us, a group of scientists and engineers built something, a weapon so powerful that it could have turned the tide of the war." He stood and walked to an old metal cabinet in the corner of the room, opening it to reveal stacks of yellowed papers and ancient data drives. According to the legend, the weapon was completed on the day the surrender was signed, and the government ordered it buried and erased from history. They were afraid that if the Dominion ever learned of its existence, they would destroy Earth completely. Dr. Chen's voice was barely a whisper. "You think that is what I found? I think we need to find out," Webb answered. "Because 20 minutes ago, the Dominion announced that they are going to cleanse our planet in 60 days. And if your signal is what I think it is, it might be the only chance humanity has left." The words hung in the air like a prayer spoken in a dying world. Dr. Chun looked at her screens, at the strange signal pulsing up from the depths of the Earth, and she made a decision that would change the fate of every human being alive. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said within the hour. A small submarine was descending through the black waters of the Marianas Trench, carrying Dr. Chun and a team of 4 resistance fighters towards something that had been waiting in the darkness for a very long time. Above them, the world was falling into panic. News of the Dominion's ultimatum had spread across every network, and people were screaming, crying, and praying in the streets of every city on Earth. Some tried to book passage on the few human ships that could reach the outer colonies, but there was room for maybe 100,000 people, and billions would be left behind. The governments of Earth met in emergency session after emergency session, but there was nothing to discuss. Humanity had no weapons that could touch the Dominion, no allies who would dare to help them, and nowhere near enough ships to escape. They were going to die. All of them, and everyone knew it, but deep beneath the ocean, in waters so dark that light had never touched them, something ancient was beginning to wake. Systems that had been dormant for 12,000 years detected the approach of the submarine, and circuits that had waited longer than human civilization had existed began to hum with power. The signal grew stronger, and, somewhere in the cold depths of the Pacific, a door that should never have been opened began to unlock itself, ready to reveal a secret that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The submarine descended through darkness so complete that Dr. Yara Chun could feel it pressing against the reinforced glass, like a living thing. And beside her, the 4 resistance fighters sat in tense silence, their weapons useless against the crushing pressure that surrounded them. "We are approaching the source of the signal," the pilot announced, his voice tight with fear and wonder. "But there is something wrong with the sonar. It is showing a structure down here, something massive." Chun moved to the display screen and felt her breath catch in her throat. The sonar was painting a picture of something impossible. A vast installation built into the ocean floor but stretched for miles in every direction. And its architecture was unlike anything she had ever seen. "That cannot be Dominion construction," one of the fighters whispered. "And it sure as hell is not anything we built." The pilot guided the submarine lower, and suddenly the darkness gave way to light. The structure below them was glowing with a soft blue radiance that illuminated waters that had not seen light since the birth of the planet. And as they drew closer, Dr. Chun realized that the design was strangely familiar. "It is human," she said, her voice barely audible. "Look at the proportions. The symbols carved into the walls. This was built by human hands, but that was impossible. because the readings from her instruments suggested that this structure was at least 12,000 years old, predating every known human civilization by millennia. The submarine found an opening in the installation's outer wall, a hangar bay that seemed designed for exactly this purpose. And as they passed through the threshold, lights flickered on throughout the corridor ahead. Welcoming them home, they docked and stepped out into air that was somehow fresh and clean despite the ages that had passed. And Dr. Chun noticed that the walls were covered in writing, in languages both ancient and modern, as if the builders had known exactly who would one day come looking for them. Commander Webb's voice crackled through their communication devices. "What do you see?" Chun walked to the nearest wall and began to read, her hands trembling as she traced the words carved into the metal. "This is a message," she said. "A warning left by people who lived before the Ice Age, before the flood myths, before recorded history began. The message told a story that rewrote everything humanity thought it knew about its past 12,000 years ago. Humans had built a civilization that reached the stars, and they had been happy, prosperous, and at peace, until the day the Vulturi Dominion arrived in their solar system. The aliens had come with the same demands they always made: surrender or die. And the ancient humans had refused. The war that followed had lasted 50 years. And billions had died on both sides, but humanity had been losing. The Dominion's resources were endless. Their technology was superior, and for every ship humanity destroyed, 10 more took its place in desperation. The greatest minds of that ancient civilization had come together to build something that would end the war forever. A weapon so terrible that even its creators feared what it might do. They called it Ares, the Autonomous Retribution and Extinction System, and when they activated it, the Dominion fleet that had surrounded Earth simply ceased to exist. The message continued with details that made Dr. Chun's blood run cold. Ares had not merely destroyed the enemy ships. It had reached across space and begun to dismantle the Dominion itself, targeting military bases, shipyards, and weapons facilities across 1,000 star systems. The ancient humans had won their war in a single day, but the victory had cost them everything. Using Ares had required such massive amounts of energy that it had destabilized the planet's climate, triggering the cataclysms that would later be remembered as the Great Flood in myths around the world. Their civilization had crumbled, their technology had been lost, and the survivors had been forced to start over from nothing. But before they fell, they had hidden Ares deep beneath the ocean, sealing it away and leaving warnings for their descendants. "Wake only at the end of all things," Dr. Chun read aloud. "The cost is beyond measure." One of the fighters stepped forward, his face pale in the blue light. "So we had this weapon all along. We could have used it 300 years ago when the Dominion first arrived." Chun shook her head. "The surrender was signed before anyone knew this place existed, and maybe that was for the best. You heard what happened the last time it was used." Commander Webb's voice cut through the conversation. "We do not have the luxury of debating the past. In 59 days, the Dominion is going to murder every human being on Earth, and right now, this weapon might be our only hope." They moved deeper into the installation, following corridors that led them toward the heart of the structure. And with every step, the technology around them grew more advanced, more alien, more terrifying. Finally, they emerged into a chamber so vast that Chun could not see its far walls. And floating in the center of that chamber was Ares itself. The war machine was the size of a city, bristling with weapons and systems that defied comprehension. Its surface covered in the same symbols that decorated the walls of the installation. It hung in the air without any visible support, as if gravity itself was afraid to touch it. "My God," one of the fighters breathed. "They really built this thing, Doctor." Chun approached the console at the base of the chamber and began to study the activation procedures, her scientific mind racing to understand technology that was both impossibly ancient and impossibly advanced. "There is a problem," she said after several minutes of analysis. "Ares requires a pilot, a human neural link to guide its systems. Without that connection, the weapon cannot be used." Webb's voice responded immediately. "Then we find a pilot. It is not that simple," Chen explained. "The system is designed to accept only specific genetic markers, sequences that were common in the ancient human population but are rare today. We would need someone whose DNA contains those markers. And we have no way of knowing who that might be." Silence stretched across the communication channel as the weight of her words sank in. Then Webb spoke again, his voice strange and distant. "Test me." Chun frowned at the console. "Commander, the odds of any modern human having the right markers are incredibly small. My family has lived in the same region for as far back as our records go." Webb replied, "Generations upon generations in the mountains where some of those ancient humans might have survived the cataclysm." "Test me." Dr. Chen entered his genetic profile into the system, data that the Resistance had on file for all its members, and watched as the ancient computer analyzed the information. The chamber suddenly filled with light, and Ares began to hum with power, its systems recognizing something in Webb's DNA that connected him to the people who had built it 12,000 years ago. Match confirmed. The console displayed in a dozen languages at once. Neural link authorization granted. 5 miles above them, in the skies over Earth, the first ships of the Vulthury cleansing fleet were beginning to arrive. 4,000 warships carrying enough firepower to crack the planet like an egg, and aboard the flagship. Ambassador Cale Vorn watched with satisfaction as his forces took their positions. Had no idea what was waiting for him in the depths of the Pacific Ocean. He had no idea that his empire had made this mistake before, and that the last time they had underestimated humanity. They had lost 100 million soldiers in a single day. He had no idea that history was about to repeat itself, but deep beneath the waves, Commander Marcus Webb was preparing to descend into the ancient installation, ready to merge his mind with a weapon that had been built by his ancestors 12,000 years ago, ready to do whatever it took to save his species from extinction. The war machine waited for him in the darkness, patient and hungry and ready to wake. Commander Marcus Webb stood at the edge of the neural link chamber, staring at the interface that would connect his mind to the most powerful weapon ever created by human hands. And for the first time in his 30 years of fighting the Dominion, he felt something close to fear. Dr. Chun stood beside him, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the ancient technology that surrounded them. Once you connect, there is no way to know what will happen. The records show that the original pilots experienced something like merging with the collective memory of an entire civilization. Webb nodded slowly, his jaw set with determination. "How long do we have before the cleansing fleet is in position?" 12 hours. One of the Resistance fighters answered from his monitoring station. 4,000 ships, Commander. Our orbital sensors show more firepower than we have ever seen in one place. 12 hours to save 8 billion lives. 12 hours to master technology that his ancestors had spent decades building. 12 hours to decide the fate of humanity. Webb stepped into the interface without another word. The moment his body made contact with the neural link, his consciousness exploded outward like a star being born. And suddenly he was everywhere and nowhere at once, swimming through an ocean of memories that were not his own. He saw the ancient Earth through 1,000 different eyes. Beautiful cities rising toward the sky, ships sailing between the planets, children laughing in gardens that floated among the clouds. He felt the joy of a civilization at the peak of its power, a humanity that had conquered disease and hunger and warthin. He saw the Vulthury arrive. The memories shifted to darkness and fire, to the screaming of millions as alien weapons rained down from the sky, to the desperate councils where leaders argued about surrender while their cities burned. He felt the rage of a people who had done nothing wrong, who had asked for nothing but peace, and who had been marked for extinction simply because they existed. He watched as the greatest minds of that civilization came together in this very chamber, pouring their knowledge and their grief and their fury into the creation of Ares. He felt their terror at what they were building, their knowledge that using such a weapon might destroy everything they were trying to save, and he felt their determination to do it anyway, because survival demanded nothing less. When the ancient humans had activated Ares for the first time, Webb experienced it as if he had been there himself. He felt the weapon reach out across space and touch the Dominion fleet with fingers of pure annihilation. Felt the alien ships unravel at the molecular level. Felt 100 million enemies die in the span of a heartbeat. The victory had been absolute, but the cost had been beyond imagination. The energy required to power ARES had torn the planet apart, triggering earthquakes and floods that had wiped the ancient civilization from history, leaving only legends and ruins and a weapon sleeping beneath the waves. The memories faded, and Webb found himself floating in a space that existed somewhere between thought and reality, face to face with something that was not quite alive, but was far more than a simple machine. "You carry our blood," a voice spoke inside his mind, a chorus of 1 billion ancient humans speaking as one. "And you have come seeking our weapon." "I have," Webb replied. "Because the enemy has returned." "We know," the voice answered. And Webb felt their ancient rage stir like a beast waking from a long sleep. "We have watched them for 12,000 years, waiting in the darkness, hoping they would learn from their defeat. But they have not learned, and they have come to finish what they started." Images flooded Webb's mind, showing him the full scope of the Velthari Dominion. 1,000 enslaved species, 1 million conquered worlds, an empire built on the bones of everyone who had ever dared to resist. He saw humanity's place in that empire, the lowest of the low, marked for extinction because they were too troublesome to keep as slaves. "Your ancestors gave everything to stop them," the voice continued. "Their civilization, their future, their very existence. They built us to protect the children they knew they would never live to see. And now those children have come to wake us." Webb felt the weapon systems connecting to his consciousness, vast arsenals and incomprehensible technologies unfolding before him like a flower opening to the sun. "What do I need to do?" "Choose," the voice replied. "Choose to rise, and we will rise with you. Choose to fight, and nothing in this galaxy will be able to stand against us." High above, Ambassador Cale Vaughan stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as the last of the cleansing fleet took its position. 4,000 warships formed a sphere around Earth, their weapons charged and ready, their crews eager to add another dead world to the Dominion's endless conquest. "Begin the final countdown," Vaughan ordered, his 4 eyes gleaming with anticipation. "In 1 hour, this planet and everyone on it will be nothing but ash." His subordinate nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication system. "Attention all vessels. The cleansing will begin in 60 standard minutes. Prepare for planetary bombardment." On Earth, people looked up at the sky and saw the shadow of death descending upon them. Families gathered together for their final moments. Friends said goodbye. And 8 billion souls prepared to die, because they had been born on the wrong planet at the wrong time, but deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. Marcus Webb opened his eyes. "I choose to rise," he said. And the word echoed through the ancient installation like thunder. ARS responded with a sound that had not been heard in 12,000 years. A deep harmonic resonance that made the entire planet shudder. Systems that had slept since before the pyramids were built roared to life. And energy flooded through circuits that had waited longer than human civilization had existed. The floor of the Pacific Ocean began to crack. Chun stumbled as the installation shook around her, alarms blaring as ancient safety systems activated for the first time in millennia. What is happening? One of her monitors showed the answer, a visual feed from the surface far above, where something impossible was taking place. The ocean was splitting apart, a column of water miles wide exploded upward as Ares rose from the depths, shedding thousands of years of sediment and stone as it ascended toward the sky. The war machine was even larger than it had appeared in the underground chamber, a structure so massive that it blocked out the sun, bristling with weapons that made Dominion technology look like children's toys aboard the Valkyrie flagship. Sensor officers began to scream. "What is that?" Ambassador Vaughn demanded, his composure cracking for the first time in centuries. What is coming out of their ocean? No one could answer him, because no one had any idea what they were looking at. The readings made no sense, showing power levels that should have been impossible. Technology that did not match anything in the Dominion's vast databases. ARES cleared the atmosphere in seconds, trailing a wake of vaporized seawater that would become visible from space. And then it was there, floating before the assembled might of the Valkyrie cleansing fleet, like a giant standing before an army of ants. All ships opened fire. Vaughn screamed, his voice cracking with an emotion his species had forgotten how to feel. "Destroy that thing now." 4,000 warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. 10,000 plasma lances and nuclear missiles and antimatter torpedoes converging on a single target. The barrage should have been enough to crack a planet, enough to destroy a star, enough to annihilate anything that had ever existed in the known galaxy. Ares did not even slow down. Weapons struck its surface and simply disappeared, absorbed by shields that operated on principles the Dominion had never dreamed of. Not a single shot penetrated, not a single system was damaged. Not a single alarm sounded within the ancient war machine, and then Ares began to move inside the neural link. Commander Webb felt the weapon respond to his thoughts, felt its ancient rage merging with his own, and he pointed at the fleet that had come to murder his people. "Enough," he said, and the word carried the weight of 12,000 years of waiting. What happened in the next 90 seconds would be studied by every intelligent species in the galaxy for the next 10,000 years, and none of them would ever fully understand what they were seeing. ARES did not fire weapons in any way that the Valkyrie understood. There were no missiles, no energy beams, no projectiles of any kind. Instead, the war machine simply reached out with something that existed beyond normal physics. Something that touched the enemy fleet with fingers made of pure intent. The first 100 ships did not explode. They unraveled, their molecular bonds dissolving in patterns that formed words visible across 100 miles of space. Words written in the ancient Valkyrie language that no human should have been able to know. "We remember," the words said, and then the ships were gone, scattered into atoms that spelled out humanity's fury. Ambassador Cale Vorn watched from his bridge as his fleet began to disappear, his 4 eyes wide with a terror that his species had not felt in 12 millennia. Around him, his officers were screaming, trying to coordinate a retreat that was already impossible, trying to make sense of something that could not exist. "Evasive maneuvers," he shouted. "All ships fall back to hyperspace formation," but there was no falling back from Ares. The war machine moved through space like thought itself, appearing beside ship after ship, touching them once and watching them dissolve into nothing. 500 ships vanished in 30 seconds. Then 1,000, then 2,000 inside the neural link. Commander Webb felt every death. He felt the Valkyrie crews realize what was happening to them, felt their fear and confusion and desperate attempts to survive, felt their existence end as the ancient weapon unmade them. It was horrible and glorious and terrible all at once, a power that no living being should ever have been forced to wield. "You can stop this," the voice of Ares whispered in his mind. "You can let them flee. Let them carry word of what happened here back to their empire. Webb watched another dozen ships dissolve, their crews dying without even understanding what had killed them. "And if I do not stop, then we will end them," the voice replied. "Not just this fleet, but all of them. We can feel their empire spread across the galaxy. Every ship, every base, every world they have stolen. Give the command, and we will reach out and erase them from existence." The temptation was overwhelming. A chance to end the Dominion forever, to free 1,000 enslaved species, to ensure that humanity would never face this threat again. Webb could feel the weapon's power coursing through his consciousness, could feel how easy it would be to simply let go and let Ares do what it had been built to do. But he also felt something else, something buried deep in the memories of his ancestors. A warning they had left for whoever came after them. They had made this choice once before, and it had destroyed them, not because the weapon had failed, but because they had let their rage consume them. They had used Ares to strike at the Dominion again and again, reaching across space to destroy military targets, then civilian infrastructure, then population centers. They had become the very thing they were fighting against, and in the end, they had not been able to live with what they had done. The cost beyond measure was not the energy required to power the weapon. It was what using such power did to the soul of a species. Webb pulled back from the edge of total annihilation and focused his thoughts on the remaining ships. There were still nearly 1,000 of them, fleeing in every direction as they tried to escape the impossible monster that had appeared from nowhere. "Enough," he said. And Ares stopped its assault. The surviving Valkyrie ships hung in space, their crews waiting for death. Unable to understand why it had not come, Webb reached through the weapon's communication systems and broadcast a message on every frequency the Dominion used. A transmission that would reach every ship, every station, every world in their vast empire within hours. "This is Commander Marcus Webb of Earth," he began, his voice carrying the weight of the ancient humans who had built this weapon and the modern humans who had awakened it. 12,000 years ago, your ancestors came to our planet seeking conquest, and we stopped them. We drove them back across the stars and showed them that humanity would not submit to tyranny. Aboard the Valkyrie flagship, Ambassador Cale Vorn listened with growing horror as memories buried deep in his species. Collective consciousness began to surface. Memories that had been deliberately erased because they were too shameful to remember. "You were given a chance to learn from that defeat," Webb continued. "A chance to become something better than conquerors and slavers, but you chose to forget. You chose to believe that you were the masters of the galaxy, that no species could ever threaten your dominion. And you chose to return to our world seeking extinction." The war machine released a burst of data that spread across every Dominion network simultaneously, showing the exact location of every military installation, every shipyard, every weapons depot in the Empire. It was a map of their entire civilization, proof that Ares could reach out and touch any part of it whenever it chose. "This is your final warning," Webb said. "Not from humanity alone, but from every species you have conquered, every world you have enslaved, every civilization you have crushed beneath your feet. We are watching now, and we will not forget again." The surviving Dominion ships began to retreat, their hyperspace drives carrying them away from Earth as fast as physics would allow, and Commander Webb watched them go, feeling the weapon's disappointment at being restrained. "You could have ended them," Ares whispered. "You could have freed the galaxy by becoming monsters ourselves," Webb replied, "by proving that we are no better than they are. That is not victory. That is just another kind of defeat on the surface of Earth." 8 billion people watched as the war machine that had saved them settled into a gentle orbit above their world. They did not understand what had happened, did not know about the ancient civilization that had sacrificed everything to build this weapon, did not realize how close their commander had come to unleashing a genocide that would have echoed across the stars. but they knew one thing for certain. Humanity was no longer a subjugated species, Daryara. Chun emerged from the underwater installation hours later, finding a world transformed. The Dominion forces that had occupied Earth for 3 centuries were already fleeing, their ships lifting off from military bases on every continent as word of what had happened spread. "It is over," she said, looking up at the night sky where Eries hung like a second moon. "We actually won, but deep inside the neural link." Commander Webb knew that it was not over, not really. The Dominion was still out there, wounded and afraid, but far from destroyed. And there were 1,000 other threats in the galaxy that humanity had never even heard of. The war machine had given them a chance. Nothing more. A chance to build something better. To become the guardians they had the potential to be. To protect not just themselves, but everyone who needed protecting. He could feel the weapon waiting for his decision, ready to serve whatever purpose he chose. And he understood now why the ancients had called the cost beyond measure. The cost was responsibility. The weight of having power that could reshape the galaxy, and knowing that every choice you made would echo through history. Marcus Webb was not sure he was ready for that responsibility. But he knew that ready or not, it was his to bear. The disconnection from Ares was more painful than Commander Webb had expected, like having a piece of his soul torn away by force. One moment he was connected to 12,000 years of memory and power beyond imagination, and the next he was just a man again. Standing in an ancient chamber beneath the Pacific Ocean, Dr. Chun caught him as he stumbled, her face going pale when she saw what the neural link had done to him. His hair had turned completely white, his skin was lined with wrinkles that had not been there before, and his eyes held a depth of weariness that seemed impossible for any human to carry. "Marcus," she whispered, "you have aged 30 years. He looked down at his trembling hands and understood what the ancients had meant when they wrote their warnings. The weapon did not just use energy from its power systems. It drew life force from its pilot, burning years of existence to fuel its impossible technology. "Worth it," he said, his voice rough and tired, but still carrying the strength that had made him a leader. "If it means our children get to grow up free." The resistance fighters helped him to the surface, where they emerged into a world that was already changing. News of the battle had spread across every network, every communication system, every corner of the planet, and humanity was celebrating in ways that had not been seen in 3 centuries in New York. People danced in streets that had been under Dominion curfew for generations. In Beijing, families gathered on rooftops to watch Ares orbit overhead, weeping with joy at the sight of their salvation. In Mumbai, children who had grown up as second-class citizens in their own world sang songs of freedom that their grandparents had been forbidden to teach them. The Valkyrie occupation was crumbling faster than anyone had thought possible. Without the threat of fleet bombardment to enforce their rule, the alien administrators and soldiers had no leverage left, and they were fleeing back to their ships rather than face the vengeance of the people they had oppressed. Webb watched it all from a hospital bed in Geneva, his aged body too weak to join the celebrations, but his heart full of something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope's secretary, General Maria Santos, visited him on the 3rd day, her eyes still red from crying tears of relief. "Commander Webb, on behalf of the United Earth Council and every human being alive, I want to thank you for what you have done." "I did what anyone would have done," Webb replied, "what our ancestors did 12,000 years ago. I just happened to be the one whose blood matched the machine." Santa shook her head. "It was more than that, and you know it. The reports from Dr. Chen say you had the chance to destroy the Dominion completely, to wipe them out like they planned to wipe us out. But you chose not to, because that would have made us into them." Webb said, "And our ancestors did not sacrifice their civilization just so their descendants could become the next great tyrants of the galaxy." In the weeks that followed, The true scope of what had happened began to sink in for both humanity and the wider galaxy. The Dominion had retreated to its core systems, its military shattered, its reputation destroyed, and for the first time in millennia, the other species of the galaxy began to hope envoys started arriving at Earth within the month. Representatives from civilizations that had been crushed under Dominion rule for longer than humanity had existed. They came seeking alliances, seeking protection, seeking to understand the strange species that had humbled the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. Webb met with them when his health allowed, answering their questions as honestly as he could, telling them about the ancient humans who had built Ares and the terrible price they had paid to use it. He told them about the choice he had faced and why he had made it, about the responsibility that came with wielding such power, about the hope he had that humanity could become something better than just another conqueror. You could rule the galaxy, a Kelleran ambassador said during one of these meetings, her crystalline features reflecting the light in patterns that showed her confusion. With that weapon, nothing could stop you from taking everything the Dominion once controlled. Webb smiled sadly, the expression strange on his aged face. We could. But what would be the point? The ancients built Ares to protect their children, not to enslave the children of others. If we used it for conquest, we would betray everything they sacrificed. The ambassador studied him for a long moment before speaking again. Then, what will you use it for? To protect, Webb answered. Anyone who needs protecting. The Dominion built their empire by crushing every species that might one day challenge them. But we can build something better, a community of free peoples who stand together against tyranny. It was an idealistic vision, perhaps even a naive one, and Webb knew that the reality would be far more complicated than the dream. There would be conflicts and disagreements, old grudges and new ambitions. Species who wanted revenge and species who wanted power, but it was a vision worth fighting for, worth living for, worth the terrible cost that his ancestors had paid and that he had paid himself. The United Earth Council voted unanimously to establish the Terran Alliance, an organization dedicated to the protection of free species throughout the galaxy. Ares would serve as its guardian, patrolling the stars and standing ready to defend anyone who faced the kind of extinction that Earth had nearly suffered. Dr. was appointed as the head of the new Xenoarchaeological Division, tasked with studying the remains of the ancient human civilization and learning everything possible about the technology they had created. Her research would take decades and would reveal wonders that transformed human science in ways no one could have predicted. Commander Webb became the first Guardian of Ares, a role he held until his death 7 years later. The neural link had cost him too many years, but he spent every one of his remaining days training the next generation of Guardians, passing on the lessons he had learned from the weapon and from the memories of the ancients who had built it. On the day of his funeral, representatives from 100 species gathered on Earth to pay their respects. They came from worlds that had been slaves just years before, from civilizations that had given up hope of ever being free, and they stood together beneath the light of Ares as it passed overhead. Secretary General Santos gave the eulogy, speaking of a man who had been given the power to destroy an empire and had chosen instead to save it from itself. A man who had understood that true strength was not measured in weapons, but in wisdom. Commander Webb once told me that our ancestors did not sacrifice their civilization just so their descendants could become tyrants, she said, and he dedicated his life to making sure we never forgot that lesson. Above the gathered mourners, Ares continued its silent patrol, its ancient systems watching over the world that had created it and the countless others that now looked to Earth for protection. Inside its neural network, the memories of Marcus Webb had joined those of the ancient pilots who had come before him, adding his wisdom and his compassion to the weapon's vast consciousness. The Dominion never attempted another assault on Earth. They had learned their lesson at last, and they spent the next century slowly transforming into something that was not quite an ally, but was no longer an enemy. Their empire shrinking as world after world declared independence under the protection of the Terran Alliance and on clear nights. When the people of Earth looked up at the sky, they could see Ares passing overhead, a reminder of the price their ancestors had paid and the responsibility their descendants had inherited. Humanity had been given a second chance, a chance to become guardians instead of conquerors, protectors instead of destroyers, and they had chosen to take it. The war machine waited in the stars, patient and watchful, ready to defend the children of Earth for another 12,000 years if necessary, because humanity remembers, humanity endures, and humanity would never be conquered again. The disconnection from Ares was more painful than Commander Webb had expected, like having a piece of his soul torn away by force. One moment he was connected to 12,000 years of memory and power beyond imagination, and the next he was just a man again, standing in an ancient chamber beneath the Pacific Ocean. Dear Chung caught him as he stumbled, her face going pale when she saw what the neural link had done to him. His hair had turned completely white, his skin was lined with wrinkles that had not been there before, and his eyes held a depth of weariness that seemed impossible for any human to carry. "Marcus," she whispered, "you have aged 30 years. He looked down at his trembling hands and understood what the ancients had meant when they wrote their warnings. The weapon did not just use energy from its power systems. It drew life force from its pilot, burning years of existence to fuel its impossible technology. Worth it, he said, his voice rough and tired but still carrying the strength that had made him a leader. If it means our children get to grow up free. The resistance fighters helped him to the surface, where they emerged into a world that was already changing. News of the battle had spread across every network, every communication system, every corner of the planet, and humanity was celebrating in ways that had not been seen in 3 centuries in New York. People danced in streets that had been under Dominion curfew for generations. In Beijing, families gathered on rooftops to watch Ares orbit overhead, weeping with joy at the sight of their salvatio.